Okay, well, let's see. It is 10:03, a couple minutes late, but it is March 29th in the year of 2012, and Eric Ferriulo and Jeff Conniff are here with me this morning, and that makes this Open Hours. So let's get talking about some business. We have PR4 is out, and we've been doing some major testing of our own, as well as getting a few bug reports in from other folks, and we're grateful for all of the feedback, and we're deciding what issues are critical and need to get fixed for 3.5, what are just sort of niggling issues that are really easy fix, very low risk that we can also push into 3.5. Otherwise, if it has a workaround, and if it's not critical, or if it's somewhat of an edge case, then those tickets will tend to be pushed off because we want the stability of the master branch at this point. So, but hopefully you're all hitting PR4 and it's serving you well. And if you see anything out of the ordinary, you're contacting us either via ticket or in the forums or pinging us on Twitter. Any of the variety of different ways that you can reach us. So last week we did a somewhat hurried review of the high points of what was in PR4. What was in PR4, but what we didn't get to was the documentation side of things, and in particular the examples. Jeff Conniff, our illustrious designer friend person, has been working diligently for the last several months on upgrading a lot of the examples, adding a lot better look and feel to them, and in many cases making them a lot easier to understand. The only times that he wouldn't make them easier to understand would be if they were relatively easy to understand already. But certainly not making anything harder to understand, and not making anything ugly. So this is all good stuff, and so we'll go over some of the, either some or all, I guess, depending upon how much time we have, the examples that have been upgraded from 3.4.1, and then we could talk a little bit more about some of the documentation side of things, and we really do want to get your feedback on what sorts of examples and tutorials and those sorts of the documentation that surrounds the code, what format you guys find most helpful for getting started or working with components or seeking to find answers, frequently asked questions, those sorts of things. So with that, I think I'm going to turn over screen sharing to Jeff, because he is the one with the show today. And I'll just keep an eye on the chat, and we can bring up any topics that you guys want to talk about as we go along. And Eric, was there any business that I forgot this morning, or anything else that you wanted to mention before we started playing?
No, I don't think so. But yeah, just so like Luke was saying, we're going through this process that we dub Test Fest. And it's where we meticulously go through every single example in every single browser that we possibly can, and make sure all the examples look great, but and work well.
But what's nice is fun.
Yeah, it actually is horrible. But what's great is that now that some of these examples Jeff has touched, it's much more pleasant of a process to go through. So. I actually enjoyed it much more this time around, and I got to test on the new iPad, so that was also fun. More fun. But yeah.
That's true.
So let's let's go through these.
Is my screen displayed okay?
Yep, showing up fine.
Okay. Here I have a page that has the examples that I've worked on, and I'll start sort of at the bottom and move up. Some of the more interesting ones are at the end that way. Here's one that I worked on, and I've got some before and afters so you can get an idea of what they used to be. Sorting had this kind of appearance before, and in some of these I just went through and made a visual pass of these so that they were a little clear. This one was a little hard to see what had been moved. So I changed it to be something that looks like this, so it's a little clearer in the example when something moves. Floated lists, sorting floated lists used to be this way. A little bit difficult to see what had moved. Changed it to be like this, so that it was a little clearer. This I'm going to skip. Alignment support for overlay functioned like this. It was a little unclear at some points exactly what it was aligning to, like right now. So I made some changes to that. So that you can see a red outline for what it's being aligned to at any time. And then you have better copy and paste text for the code.
Wait, I believe that's true. The alignment offsets are still not supported. I could be wrong. I haven't worked extensively with alignment. Jeff, Eric, you might know better.
Yeah, there hasn't been any updates to supporting offsets other than if you were to use some type of padding or margin on your content box on an overlay frame to help simulate that type of offset. But
stacking of overlay was a little bit hard to understand what was happening because these index readings were hidden under previous ones, so you couldn't see all of them at a time. So I just relayed that out. So
it looks like Satyan really likes that blue and red border style.
Yeah, I kind of removed that.
Kind of removed that. Thank you.
So with the index, the z-index showing in the lower left, and the overlay number showing in the top, you can see exactly what's going on with all the z-indexes as things change now. Nothing's really hidden at any time. So again, just making those a little more understandable. This is just visual differences, so I won't go into those. The arrow key event, did you want to talk about this, Luke? The general concept behind the example?
Sure, I guess. So the idea behind the example, if you haven't looked at the example, that's the synthetic event example. So the idea was that the example is showing how to create an arrow event. So you can subscribe to no dot on arrow. And so when I originally created that example, I built those little robots with all of the Photoshop skills that I could muster. And so Jeff had to go at it. There's too much more about it that I need to talk about.
So now when you subscribe to these, when you actually set one to focus, you can see the difference. You can see it get the focus. And
these are robots that Jeff actually built at home, by the way.
That's right. At least in Photoshop.
And they bring you the toast.
They bring you the toast. So they're kind of fun. You can drive them around the screen. And you get the feeling of actual 3D, but they aren't actually 3D. They're just shrinking in size when they move up and down. This is a new example for dial that shows how you can animate a sprite with it. And you can use the keyboard as well. And if you want larger increments, page up and page down.
That was something new you added to dial, right? Was the more advanced keyboard support?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thought the page up and page down has been there since the beginning. There was major increment and minor increment, right?
Yeah, you're right, Luke. It was the home and end that got a slight difference.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
Mm-hmm. Home now goes to the minimum value and end goes to the maximum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, similar thing. So, Jeff, you also added that behavior to slider as well.
Yes.
In 3.5. So slider now has keyboard access, which is fantastic. I've been wanting to do that for a long time, and I haven't. So I'm glad you stepped in.
Added another example to the suite of sorting. Instead of this one, or kind of in addition to this one, I added this fish sorting example. So you can drag things over here and drop them, move them to different categories.
So the value of this example, aside from looking good, is to illustrate having multiple sections where you can sort within. I guess you're dragging from one to another and then dragging within others. So effectively you have 5 different lists going on, right?
Right. And in fact, these objects, bars, are really just other objects that can also be drug.
Oh, look at that. I didn't even notice it.
Strange, but you can do that one. This one, is this new for 3.5? I don't remember. I think I just put this in because it's a pair to the radial gradient, but if you haven't seen it, this is a tool that's in the graphics component, and it allows you to draw on the screen in a WYSIWYG way instead of adding text. The Shift 2 will allow you to move the pencil without drawing a line. And an Alt drag gives you the ability to draw some Bezier curves. So that helps you to generate code, and you can copy and paste it into your app to get the objects. You don't have to guess at the X and Y coordinates.
So Wei is asking if there's a URL that he can hit to view all of these examples, and not the new ones specifically. There's a single page that lists all of the examples, but it doesn't actually have any sort of preview like this has a little preview, which would be a nice addition to the site, I think.
Mm-hmm. There's a companion radial gradient tool. Just some of these, some of the attributes in some of these parts of graphics were a little tough to guess at. So I created these tools to make it easier to visualize the property. So in this, you can sort of dynamically modify things and see the results. And then if you want the code from that, you can also change the colors, and then you can get the snippet from that, and then you've got the code that you need to paste into your graphics code to get that exact image, or at least, sorry, that gradient inside whatever size object you put it in. So that's radial gradient and path drawing tool. We had an example for YUI core that showed what can be done with, just a simple example of changing things in the DOM, changing some of the styles. And it painted so fast that you couldn't really see it change. It was just changed. It told you it was changed. So we wanted something that would show a little more of something actually changing. So we put together this one that does a lot of change. So we've got an image changing, and we have a div that has text in it, changes color and text shadow. So these are actually divs instead. So anyway, if you look down here, there's several things that are changing in that, and you can see it demonstrates a little better. I was asked to put together a reusable dialogue tool or example. So here's an example that you can use to create a simple dialogue. And this allows you to see what it would look like with different icons in it, or change the text. To whatever you want. If you put no icon in here, it actually centers the text for you. So all of those things are done in the CSS. And then there's some extra code that you can see for how to make it actually do something when you click on these buttons. So this is meant to be a starting point that you can repurpose and use for those message situations.
So one thing with that one too is Jeff and I have been talking about turning this into potentially a gallery module so that people could get the styling and the sort of factory helper method to create this reusable dialogue and just turn it into a gallery module. So it would be much easier for people who once they read through this example can just start using it. So it's one thing we might try to squeeze in.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Over the next week here or so here.
This suite of images that go in the dialogue are yours for the taking. We created them from scratch, so there's no worry about anyone needing claim to them. Totally free. We have a tooltip example. Again, it's supposed to be a lightweight tooltip. I decided to do an example of tools. And so when you hover over any of these, it will fly out. And that tooltip displays relative to where the cursor is instead of just the edge of the box.
Yeah. And for those of you viewing at home or watching the recording, the funny icon on the cursor that's obscuring the tooltip is just because of the Adobe Connect presentation when it's sharing the position of the cursor. So it doesn't normally have that funny icon over the top of the tooltip.
So that's in the overlay module on that example. In node list, we had one before that is like this, was like this. And I modified that a little bit to have the simple example like this. I think it's a little clearer to understand what's going on. Then took that example, same node list, using the same features in the module, and created this one. And you can click on the ducks. And if you'd like to see them show some attitude, when you click on them, they have various comments. So this gives a good workout to node list and demonstrates a lot of the things that you can do. And no ducks were injured in the making of that example. Get and set properties. You might remember this example if you've seen it before. The blue box changes size. Change that a little bit to clarify what was going on, and that looks like this now. And if you set that, then the corn cob grows, and get puts the size in pixels, the width on the ruler. There's a handling DOM events thing, which is a little bit enhanced from what it was before, that shows a little more clearly what's going on when you click on these.
I like the image tag.
Hey, thanks, Luke. Grids, using grids. It's a great component. This was the example before, and I just found that it wasn't as clear as it could be when you move these. At first, I wasn't sure what it was showing, so I revamped it a little bit, made it look a little bit like blocks of text. And gave it this ability to click on these and get a code snippet that you can copy and paste so that you'll get the syntax correct immediately and start filling in the code. That's how that one works. And animation on a curve. If you remember seeing this one, it randomly got some X and Y points and made a curve. Wherever you clicked, it was going to randomly draw a curve, animate. So I changed that to be a little bit more like a tool, so that when you move these components, it changes the values in the code here, code snippet that you can copy and paste, as well as demonstrate exactly where the curve is going to go with those points.
I had a lot of fun testing this one out on the iPad with the, just using my finger to grab onto the circles and drag them around, and it worked really smooth and nice.
I'm glad I made the circles big enough on it.
Yeah, they were.
And then this should give you then the idea to get an animation which is about what you need for your actual use, and then copy these values out of it and use that to create your animation. Hopefully it'll save somebody some work. So that's it for this time around.
All right, excellent work. I look forward to seeing all of the rest of the 300 or so examples updated for 3.6.
I'll get right on it, Luke.
Yeah. So as far as the format of the examples, there's been sort of a perennial tension between this notion of a tutorial versus an example versus a code snippet. There's sort of different problems that we want to solve for different audiences. The people that are new to the library, depending upon their their skill, their background set. If they're really familiar with JavaScript, they've used other libraries, then typically they'll be more familiar with individual problems, and they'll be looking for plug-and-play solutions and not necessarily need a lot of verbiage to explain what's the individual step-by-step. So just having a little code snippet is often good enough for some people. versus the people that want to understand what's going on under the hood, if they're going to be investing more time into using the library and its components, or they're working on something that's a little bit more complex, and so having a deeper understanding is of more value than, or for people that are coming to the library not from a background of using other libraries, and or they're maybe new to front-end development or something like that, and where the more education that we can offer, the better, I guess. So the example suite right now is sort of a mix of both of those, tutorial style and specific solution style. And we have a few tutorials that are taken out, that they're separately, like the GitHub contributors tutorial, and there are a couple other tutorials, but they're not the sort of using the components of the library sort of tutorial. And then we have user guides themselves, which just have, let me share my screen. Then we have user guides themselves, which have code snippets inline. Some user guides have actual functioning code snippets. That's a rarity right now, but I experimented with that for data table. I'm not sure, Eric, if you know of any other user guides that are doing inline examples, but so the code that's displayed here, for example, for data table is what's executed and shown down there. So I try to do that, which is also a good way of avoiding having code snippets in the user guides which have bugs in them and don't actually work like you say they're supposed to work.
Yeah, that is a good idea. I think for some things like widgets, it's much easier to do this where, for something like model or, whatever, it'd be kind of hard to render visually since there isn't inherently some visual aspect of it.
Yeah. That is true. Yeah, definitely for the components of visual representation. So, Victor, you were saying that. Open up the chat again. Hang on a second. You started off the hour with saying that you like the smaller code snippets, and Andrew, you had rebutted that a bit, saying that it really depends on the context and who's looking for it. And I agree with both of you. I think that we had this grand vision to have inline snippets that might appear in user guides, such as what's in data table, have these snippets be reusable and show up in the example suite, and also having having a sort of a playground where you can start from an example snippet, or start from an example and all of the code is then editable, and you can modify it to C and make it sort of a JS fiddler, a playground sort of area. That's definitely more of a coding investment, and so that becomes a resourcing challenge when we have a lot of catching up to do with the YUI 2 components that haven't yet been migrated over, individual features that haven't been migrated over, and the various other things that we have simultaneously going on. It is definitely something on our wish list, and I want to say it's something on our to-do list, but if it's on our to-do list, it's not really high on our to-do list at this point. But if there's anybody out there that wants to create a proof of concept or something like that, maybe there's a hack day coming up, and you could create an example like that, that would be, or an application of that sort, that would be fantastic for everybody involved, I think.
So, and one of the things like that, I don't know if you guys noticed when Jeff was showing his examples, is he wasn't actually on the YUI library website or the staging website. He was able to develop all these examples locally using the Select tool that Ryan Grove wrote. And so that's been really handy for us to be able to keep our example source, like the source code that's generating these example pages, right next to the code with the, in the module folder with the code that the example is supposed to be showing off. And so with, so Luke has right here running Celic locally. So it can do a generation process where it compiles everything into static HTML pages, or it also can run in server mode, which is really handy for making changes, saving it in your editor, and then just going to the page and refreshing and seeing those changes live. So it's really sped up our ability to get examples coded and make sure that they're going to work right before pushing them out into the website. So one great thing is that if you guys come up with some type of example and think it would be useful for other people, you can easily write these examples in the source code, in the YUI3 source tree, and issue a pull request, and we'll happily pull them in, and they'll show up on the website after a week or so. We do a push probably maybe once a week if we have any documentation changes to the website. So it doesn't have to wait until the next release to go out on the website for documentation and examples.
Yeah, that's true. I actually have quite a laundry list of examples that I want to write for data table, actually, because the formatter and node formatter functionality and the view architecture actually it affords a lot of flexibility with what you can do just out of the box today. But it is, for now, it is work that has to be done by the implementer. So the two-prong approach that I want to take to it is in the run-up to having those features being added to core directly as core modules for things like frozen columns or expandable rows, row grouping, and those sorts of things just supported as feature modules. So the starting point is that I can create examples that show stripped down implementation that can be a little bit faster to create, that can be just a cut and paste solution for folks, or rather, and then they create a gallery module which is a preview to the behavior that will likely exist in the core when it comes out. So that can be, because the gallery builds are weekly, that allows me to get the code out sooner to preview before even the preview releases. I've mentioned that before, that using the gallery build cycle as a more rapid deployment strategy for getting module development out there, and so for people that are interested in a particular feature, they have more earlier access to that sort of thing. But in the context of examples, using an example and the fact that we can push examples at any time, we can do multiple documentation pushes a day if we want. It takes very little time for us to update the live site with documentation site. We maintain a separate code branch that is just for doing live documentation changes. So any examples that we want to add over the life of a current release, then we can do that in parallel to development on the next release. So we don't have to wait. And same thing goes for any fixes in examples or fixes in user guide documentation. We no longer have to wait for a full release to come out before we can correct embarrassing mistakes. But to Eric's point, because the documentation source and the example source is now in the source tree out on GitHub, which I should show. then if you find a typo, it's really as easy as if you are maintaining a fork of YUI3, then fix that typo locally and issue a pull request, which I say is easy because I'm familiar with Git and all of that sort of thing, and I'm also familiar with the process. So from outside the familiarity zone, that might seem a little daunting, but there aren't very many steps involved in that.
So we do have a tutorial. I'll link to it right now.
Oh, good.
Which we have on the website to help people just understand the process of contributing to the YUI project. It essentially just means if you're used to contributing to other projects, just we prefer if you create a topic branch so that the changes for this particular new feature are isolated together, so they're easier to review and merge in for us. But we kind of go through it step by step, a tutorial here to help people through this process, and just as a reminder if you forgot a certain step of it. But I guess one thing we should probably do is add another tutorial about how to contribute things like examples, because it's even we sometimes have to go look at other examples in the library to see how do you do this thing again, and until you do it enough, you really have to need some type of reference to help you along, and so you probably owe everyone at least that to help.
Yeah, and that actually this reminds me of another point, which is in terms of different formats for examples and tutorials, there's also screencasts and other presentations. And of course, we try to be really good about getting presentations up. If there's a recorded presentation, someone's actually giving a presentation on some from either YUIConf or even from some internal presentations at Yahoo, if it's okay to share that, there's something private that was brought up during the presentation, then we'll try to share those as well. But screencast is something that we have been wanting to do for an awful long time, and we have not gotten started with that yet. And it's just this tension that keeps building and building and building until we finally start doing that. But contributing an example or something like that seems like a very good candidate for a screencast. But I am curious about the types of screencasts, the formats and the lengths of screencasts, and the individual focus of screencasts that people find most appealing or find most useful. So if you want to feedback into the chat, or if you're watching the recording later, you can add a comment to the blog post, or just talk to us in IRC about what sort of screencast, what sort of documentation or example format that you prefer. And also, of course, if you have an example or want to build an example like Todd, I think that you have several great examples using data table in the preview state. I would love to see those merged into main, so I want to make that as easy for you as possible. And other folks likely have examples that they have either used internally when referencing from one person to another, or even taking a JS fiddle that was an example of something. And if we can take a JS fiddle of something and make the process of pulling in a fiddle into an example for something that actually shows up on the site, then that could be a pretty easy win until it comes to TestFest, in which we have 30 or 40 more examples to go through in every browser. But but what was I looking for on here? Oh yes, the source.
Do you want to bump up your font a little bit?
Yes, I do. So let's go into the button. So here we are on YUI3 source button. There's the docs directory. And each of these files, so the index.mustache corresponds to the user guide. And this is just markup, and it has a couple of handlebars helpers, but other than that, it's pretty much HTML with a few markdown conveniences like code blocks. These are going to be syntax highlighted. And then there will be inline code, which this is nice because it handles escaping of HTML. It'll do HTML escaping. So if you put backtick and then less than strong greater than, you're writing a strong tag inside of there, it'll show up as the textual representation for that markup in the rendered page. But it's it's a familiar format, and there's nothing terribly complex about it. When you create headers, they get sucked automatically into the table of contents that shows up on the right-hand side of the page, and this is for user guides. And then back in the docs directory, that's the user guide again. Then for individual pages that you want, you can set them up in the component.json file. This should all be fairly self-explanatory. If you're going to be contributing anything, adding a new example or something, they will show up in the examples, and I can't think of a case where there wouldn't already be an examples section for you to just copy and paste a new one and make minor modifications to the things that are in there. And then, so here the name, for example, that would then correspond to the file name. So the component.json name corresponds to button.mustache in that same directory. So button.mustache here is that example, and it doesn't actually have to contain much. And we have some standard classes that we wrap the intro in. And if you look at a couple of the examples in the source directory, then you'll see the pattern that we have of using, this is a handlebars helper for a partial. So this is getting the button source HTML partial and the button source JS partial. And then we'll take those same partials and we'll wrap them in these triple backticks so that we get the syntax highlighting that shows the actual code that is being executed on the page again. So we don't have a disconnect between the code that's on the page and the code that's actually running the example. So then, in that same directory, there's the partials directory, and there's also an assets directory if you want to maintain assets, such as in here we have icon sprites and things like that. But in the partials directory, these again are just mustache files, and they have the file name that corresponds to the helper. So it'll be looking for a partials /button-source-html.mustache. And so, let's see, so button source JS mustache, and this should look pretty familiar. And that's really all it takes to put together an example file. And then if you have, well, I guess other than actually seeing it working. And seeing it working, you'll be wanting to use Selec. Let's see.
It's in your list there. Yeah.
So, and he has a nice, pretty homepage for it. The user guide, which is referenced from his GitHub repo, which talks about how to install it, and at that point, has some basics about how to use it and where things are set up. Again, it's talking about the component.json file. And um, where are we? Command line usage, right? So then in the command line, you can either call select, or what we tend to prefer to do is to do, we'll call select with the server parameter, which then creates that, it just creates a server which automatically parses the content that's in the particular folder. So you can either pass in a folder here, or it'll just default to your current directory. So if you are in a component source directory, then you can just launch select with server there. Or actually, you know what? I tend to run select just at the project root, so at YUI3 source, and then launch select there. With a server mode, you can optionally pass in a port, and then just visit that port on localhost, and you have your rendered examples are available through navigation, which is a nice, easy way to make sure that it is working, first of all, and then rendering OK. And follow that up with a pull request, and everything, and that makes our life a lot easier. We can pull in your examples, and then you have a nice presence in the Git log for the project, and eventually you'll steal our MVPs from Masterbranch or something, masterbranch.com.
Or you'll at least show up as your little pretty picture will show up on the GitHub contributors app example.
That's true, actually. That is another one that was. Is that new in 3.5? Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think we've gone over it before, but it's but you recently added transitions, right?
Yeah.
Or you added transitions for PR4.
Correct, yeah, for 3 actually, but 4. Yeah, but the thing is they just don't really show up too well over the delay through Connect. So.
Right, that's true.
But yeah, so what's been great though is I think I forget. I think there's actually screenshots further down in this that I took, and I forget what the number of contributors to YUI was before, but it was something maybe in the 40s. Go down a little bit further. 44.
Yeah, 44.
So, and I think if you look now, I think there's like something like 54. So this was just all basically from pull requests coming in, and people are contributing a lot of language packs. Like Calendar's gotten a bunch of language packs, and that's weird that the forks say 0. And just bug fixes, documentation fixes. We've been seeing all of that for 3.5, which is great. So.
Yep.
You contribute an example. Your
pull requests, yay. And, so, yeah, what you're not seeing is some fancy transitions for sliding and fading. But at least it looks good to me. And really zippy. It's very, very responsive. I really like that. So let's see. At this point, I don't have a plan for a topic for next week's Open Hours. The planned release date for 3.5.0 final is April 10th, and that should give everyone plenty of time to flex PR4, let us know any of your feedback. And we'll be starting development on 3.6 in parallel to that time. In some part, we're waiting until the 10th because some of our team is out, and we want to make sure that that we have bodies in the house when the release goes out. So that's a result of their vacation timing, thus delaying our release, is a result of the trouble that we had with the upgrading and the deployment process, where PR3 was stalled and we ended up going into PR4. So that pushed everything back, and unfortunately, it pushed it back into other people's vacation planning. So, but April 10th is the release date, and if you have specific ideas for that you want to hear talked about on open hours in coming weeks, then let us know. If you have an internal usage that you think would be good to either talk about or code review or show and tell, then we haven't done a good old-fashioned code review open hours in a long time. And I think that with some of the newer architecture, in particular the app framework stuff, it might be good to go over an example implementation in the wild of what someone's real-world application setup using those tools looks like and how it's structured. I think that would be it would be good feedback for us, and it would be useful information for everybody involved. So if you have an app running on the app framework that you want to share, discuss the structure of that, then let us know. Otherwise, I can always fall back to talking about data table or something. But Lord knows there's no shortage of stuff to talk about there. But I think that'll do it for today. We'll close out a couple minutes early. And thank you again, Jeff, for coming on and showing us the examples, and keep up the great work. And again, folks outside are welcome to give their contribute examples or documentation fixes themselves, and if in the least some suggestions for what examples you would like to see. And so for Eric and Jeff and Derek and all of the rest of us on the YUI team, thanks for dialing in, and we will see you hopefully next week. We'll have a topic. We'll send out an invite either on Friday or Monday if it's going to happen. So we'll talk to you then.